Hey, this is Simon Sapper from the Union Jews podcast. We're proud to be part of the Labour Radio Podcast Network with more than 200 Labour radio shows and podcasts from across the USA and around the world. The Labour Radio Podcast Network, where working people speak. Find us at labourradionetwork.org.
Hello, working people of Southwest Washington.
You're listening to episode 45 of Working to Live in Southwest Washington, produced by the Southwest Washington Central Labor Council. Like the bumper you just heard at the top of the show says, we're also a proud member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, with over 200 radio shows and podcasts for working people just like you. Find out more about the network at labourradionetwork.org. I'm Harold Phillips, and before we get started, we want to remind you that the views and opinions expressed on this show are not necessarily the views and opinions of the Southwest Washington Central Labor Council, its affiliate unions, our guests' unions or employers, not even that nice patio overlooking the Columbia River. Hey, there might still be a couple of nice days left to enjoy it, folks. But seriously, nobody's but theirs. Now that we've got that over with, let's keep talking about the weather. Because it's getting colder out there, right? And rainier. And the leaves are turning color. I know you know what that means. The general election on November 5th is just a few weeks away. You thought I was going to talk about Halloween, didn't you? Look, I know. It's getting harder and harder to escape all the talk about the upcoming election. But most of that talk is about the presidential election, and there are some really important races happening right here in Southwest Washington that aren't getting nearly the attention that one is. For instance, there are several people running for seats in our state legislature in Olympia. Why should you care? Well, you might remember on a previous episode, somebody mentioned these things called RCWs, the Revised Code of Washington. Those are the state laws that govern just about everything here in the Evergreen State. And who do you think is in charge of making or changing those RCWs? Well, that'd be your state representatives and your state senator. We've got two people running for the legislature here with us today who can tell us a little more about that. Marla Keithler, running for state senate. Thanks so much for joining us, Marla.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And a good friend of the show, Terry Niles, who's running for the State House of Representatives. Thanks for coming back on the show, Terry.
Thank you for having me. I love opportunities to talk to my brothers and sisters in labor.
So, Terry, Marla, now you're both running in the 17th Legislative District. Where is that?
Well, it's a very good question because the where has changed this year. This district now starts in East Vancouver, but it heads very west. It spans 3 counties and it ends in Goldendale in Klickitat County. So not only is it broad geographically, but also in the diversity of the communities and the economies. You know, where it's starting in East Vancouver is certainly more of an urban kind of central hub to a lot of commerce and activity that is in that I-5 corridor. But where it ends is really very much still strongly rooted in agriculture. And I think that type of district is really this opportunity, which I think you see in myself and Terry throwing our hat in a ring, to have a different kind of voice that we can send to Olympia to represent the diversity of Southwest Washington.
So you said that the boundaries of the 17th Legislative District have changed. Why did they change? How did that happen?
The 17th LD was changed due to a Voting Rights Act violation in the 15th Legislative District, which affected all the districts around that. So we lost 15,000 voters in North Clark County, and they pushed us eastward, and we picked up 15,000 voters in Klickitat County. We already had Skamania County in our district. The uniqueness of that is we lost some very conservative, I like to say kind of anti-union, people up in North Clark County, and now we picked up some very union-friendly and working families-friendly people in the East District now, in Klickitat and Skamania and Underwood area. I do want to say that, when I knock on doors in Klickitat and Skamania, those have a long history of labor. and being involved in labor unions. And so knocking on doors, you just say, oh, I'm endorsed by the unions, the teachers, and they're going, okay, you have my vote. It is something to kind of get back to, is reaching out to the labor community in our district. And I'm trying to do that on the campaign trail, and it's really turning out to be very effective.
Terry, you said that the change in the district was due to a Voting Rights Act violation. What
Yes,
happened there?
well, it was a voting right violation where they were disenfranchising Latino voters in the 15th district. So they had a very gerrymandered boundary, which made it where Latino voters were not able to, though they were the majority in that district, they were not able to have any voting power at all. So it even went to our Supreme Court, our US Supreme Court, and they denied hearing it. So they said, yes, this has been gerrymandered and it has to be redistricted. So because of that, we end up with a district that's much more friendly to getting people like me and Marla elected that will represent the working families in this district.
Well, Marla, you mentioned the diversity of the district, and just the geographic area kind of indicates that diversity. You've got the urban area in East Vancouver, but then you've got the rural area in Klickitat County. What other sort of diversity are you seeing as you go out through the district?
Well, I think that diversity is a main reason why when I saw this new map, it was almost this instant gut instinct or reaction of, I know these people. I love that you touched on how it spans from urban out to agricultural, but also this is squarely planted now in the Gorge, the first national scenic area that was ever passed at the federal level and really unites Oregon and Washington. And I think for all of us that live in these communities along the Columbia River, we very much know that dynamic and the interrelationship we have with our partners in Oregon, but also see that disconnect at times in Olympia of how our part of the state is thought about or considered, not just about as an economic driver, but certainly the agriculture that we contribute, not only to the region, but the nation, and tourism and these other components where I think we can even see our neighboring state has taken a different tact. So what I see on the ground and what I knew to be true when I saw the newly drawn map is that a lot of people down here feel like they have been ignored, like their voices are not heard or represented by somebody that is living their experience in these communities in the day-to-day, struggling and being creative, because often I think in your smaller communities, you are tasked with making solutions, solving problems on the ground and coming up with those solutions and building those coalitions and collaborating and bringing different perspectives in and finding a way forward and doing that because you want to build a community you want to live in, which is certainly something everybody wants to do in communities big and small. But I love being able to speak to, and I think it's what I hear from people that share their experience of living in these communities across the district, is the sense of pride in ownership, in building things that you want to be proud of, and that sometimes you can feel disenfranchised when it seems like you're coming forward and saying, this is a problem, I need your help, I've done all I can to move the issue forward, now you need to pick up the baton. And often that baton is not picked up. And I think we're seeing that right now when some of the communities in this district are not getting the same resources to address issues like housing, which thereby unaddressed leads to a growing concern around houselessness or those that are currently in need of shelter. You also see it when we're talking about public safety and funding the things that we say we care about, an equal opportunity for all of our kids across this district and across the state to have the same access to a good education, to pursue their dreams, and, wanting to make sure that what we have built and nurtured in our communities is also there for the next generation. So I think in that sense, yes, there is diversity, but there's also a lot of unity. At the end of the day, people are really concerned right now about finding solutions and working together. We're tired of the hyperpartisanship, finding ways to come together and coming from an experience in local government. That's what I have known and been operating in.
I do want to add that, me living in East Vancouver, and just a little bit about the geography of the district, it's 157,000 people. And 130,000 of those people are in urban areas of Clark County. So it's really been great to get out into the other 20,000. I think there's 12,000 people in Skamania and 15,000 people we picked up in Klickitat. But those people, what they have to say is important. And like Marla said, there's things that we share. Of course, when I'm talking to people in Clark County, I start talking to them about timber, their eyes glaze over, but they need to realize that that's part of our district now. And so taking that message and Klickitat's message and Skamania County's message to the majority of the district, which is in Clark County, has been really important, and it's something that I've really kind of strived to do.
What you're talking about really echoes a fundamental tenet of the labor movement, which is that we're all in it together, right?
Right.
That an injury to one is an injury to all. And this show is speaking to the working people in Southwest Washington. Those folks might be loggers. They might work at a gas station in Vancouver. They might be a grocery checker in Goldendale. But we all still have the same kind of struggles. What are the big unifying working people's issues in those three counties in your district that you're looking to take on when you do get to the legislature?
So, me and Marla have been talking about this for a while. We've been going to forums and talking about these things that are unifying: the lack of affordable housing, childcare, and just a lack of affordability in general. And, me being a single working mother, I understood what it was like not to have, affordable housing, childcare, as a nurse working long shifts, 12-hour shifts, nights and weekends. That's a lived experience. So when I go to the door and I talk to people in Skamania County and I talk to people in Clark County, they all can relate to that. Having somebody like a real working class candidate running is something that I'm getting a lot of people stepping up and going, oh, thank you so much. But I think that Marla can talk a little bit more about the lack of childcare and affordable housing affects the rural communities, because she's been dealing with that as a mayor. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think, again, all of that is also about livable wages, which has certainly always been a key tenet of the labor movement. And, I love that we're having this conversation today because it speaks to these shared interests. Just today out here in this part of the district, the Washington State Nurses Association announced they finally reached an agreement with our one public hospital in White Salmon for the salary increase that they had been fighting for and had to really push because of these costs of living and fair pay for valued, skilled work. And so again, it is the whole hamster wheel almost, or the hamster wheel we're trying to break, which is that we have livable wages to address the costs that it takes in any of these communities to provide for your family and aspire for the future that you're trying to build. And that has become increasingly difficult. And Terry touched on it, but two key issues in that space, those rising costs of living, are absolutely childcare. In this district, Skamania and Klickitat are known childcare deserts. It does not mean that Clark County does not also have the problem, but I love that now the way the district is drawn, we can really own the sense of urgency around this issue, and it is an economic development issue. When parents do not have childcare, they are missing shifts, they are missing wages. That is an employer that is also then having to backfill or solve that lack of someone that can't call in that day. So it is an effect that is seen across the spectrum. It comes back to what we're trying to attract into our communities about those livable wages and the jobs that can provide them. And housing, absolutely. As a small town mayor, I'm still an employer. And we have lost police officers because they have slowly had to creep 20 minutes away from White Salmon, 45 minutes away from White Salmon, and then said, you know what? This is too much. I think it's time for a life change. Same thing in my public works department and on the administration side. So as employers in this part of the district are also wanting to invest and create those opportunities where people can see a long-term future in that skill or profession that they are choosing, it requires the ability to be able to plant down roots and stay and have confidence that you can continue to provide, but also to do more than just get by. And I think that is a key point. In general, I think that umbrella of the rising costs of living captures a lot of these key issues that at the end of the day, people feel in their pocketbook when they're checking the mailbox and they see that next bill and the water rate has gone up again after another, increase the year prior. All these things combine. And I think the perspective that we bring is really about that requires a lot of different policy approaches. That requires policies that are putting people first and making sure that we protect the right of organized labor to fight and push for the things that are right against employers that might not be keeping that in mind. It also means we've got to do the best we can to make sure that the market is providing housing for all income levels and protecting all types of housing. And it also means that our communities have everything that a family needs to decide, is this a place where I'm going to feel wanted and valued and can choose this job and this place to raise my family? And that means good schools, access to childcare, and access to those community resources that make you feel like you have a strong social fabric to contribute and give back and keep a healthy community thriving.
On that topic, Marla, you're a mayor, right? You've been handling a lot of these issues already. Why take the step to run for the state legislature?
Well, maybe it's because I'm crazy, but I actually think it's because I'm tired, because I am doing that work day in and day out, and I'm hitting walls. I hit walls when it comes to housing, and there's funding that we want to apply for. But the way that the formulas are working right now to decide, which communities should we help offset that significant cost of building out infrastructure so a developer can come in and do a lower cost housing build, my numbers don't work because those policies have been written around larger areas, Vancouver, Seattle. At the same time, we as a city have also been frustrated by what we have felt, and I think this is district-wide as I'm talking to people from Vancouver all the way to Goldendale. In order to push on an issue like housing, you still have to have community input. If you don't have a sense of ownership on something, it's really hard to disengage or armchair quarterback all the things that were wrong about that decision. So on a thing like housing, I don't agree that the way to do it is to have a policy that comes out of Olympia and says, hey, this worked in Seattle, so every community across the state needs to allow X on these types of zones or in these types of areas. You have to still create levers where there's collaboration, state policies that also still support some local decision-making so that there's buy-in. Because if you don't have buy-in, you will encounter a bias of obstruction, either at that bureaucratic level of city or county government, or even just in that community, the pushback that can still prevent a development from happening. So on housing especially, that motivates me a lot because we have been in the thick of that issue now for 5 years. We haven't solved it, no way. But as we have tried to pull different levers, there's some that we just absolutely have not been able to pull. And childcare is another one of those. I see the barrier where some of these programs where funding is open up or there's set-asides for communities with a lower population base. It doesn't mean that that application is more accessible. And the difference there is about what it is that's running a small city. And often it's a handful of people. So there's limited staff capacity. There is not that funding that's provided for all the technical studies or materials that are being requested on the front end, but we know what we need. And so how can we think about changing some of these programs so that they are accessible and that money can be moving into these communities that we talk about often, and that's at the federal level too. You often hear about rural set-asides. But the thing is, there still has to be someone to make that happen. And so seeing where there's that disconnect, I think could be a value to making sure that when we're building out these programs and committing funding to some of these issues, we're really thinking about the full spectrum of who it needs to reach, both large and small. And we know we have voices for the large side. So it would be nice to have some voices that also know some of the uniqueness of this part of Southwest Washington and ways that we could make those programs more effective. Because I think at the end of the day, people want to believe in a government that works for them. And when you don't see these funds coming back into your town to help build or solve some of these problems, you don't think the government's listening to you. And that's our job. If we're elected, it is our job to be listening to the people and bringing those projects and those opportunities and programs into Southwest Washington.
Well, I do want to tell you, Marla, that I've been talking about the fact that people don't mind paying taxes if they see a benefit from their taxes. Nobody's going to be yelling about that. I've been talking about that since 2021. There are some very unique things in our district that really need to be addressed, and that's equity and school funding. And that is really unique in Skamania County because of the lack of personal property that is owned there. And so property taxes can't be depended on.
Terry, now you've run for the legislature before.
Mhm.
What made you decide to run again? And what lessons did you learn from the last time you ran?
So I decided to run again. And, it's the same things that I was fighting for in 2022. It's the same thing. I was actually still carrying my lit from 2022. Here it's 2024, and we're fighting for that again. Also, we lost 6 legislators in healthcare. So believe it or not, we don't have a nurse that's serving in our legislature. We don't have anybody that's served in an active healthcare in our legislature. And so we have a lot of healthcare issues, and that'll be one of the things that I address. And as everybody knows, I've been fighting for safe working conditions and nursing for 26 years, bargaining contracts, and fighting for the nurses that I was representing as their union vice president. But that's something I'll really be talking about. There's healthcare deserts in Klickitat and in Skamania, and there's workforce shortages. I mean, we talk a lot about CTEs for labor. How do we fill healthcare positions? We don't have enough nurses. We're going to have a crisis right now. When I got the endorsement of the firefighters, that was one thing they brought up, is the fact that, in the Olympia area, firefighters and first responders are caring for patients in parking lots, not because there's no beds, there's no nurses to take care of them in the
Wow.
hospital. So we really need to address that workforce shortage with the same urgency that we are addressing jobs in the trades as well. So I've talked to Liz Berry. I'm hoping to serve on the labor committee, and we can start making that happen and start dealing with those workforce shortages, because I know that's a problem for Skamania County as well as Clark County. That's universally across the board.
Yeah, sadly, it is across the board. It's nationwide, the lack of healthcare workers. So, Terry, Marla, we're coming to the end of our time. If you had just one message that you wanted the listeners to take with them as they head into November and start filling out their ballots, what would that be?
Okay. For those in the 17th legislative district, you are listening to 2 people that have stepped up to fill a critical position. This race is like a razor thin margin. We have a slight blue edge, but that margin will be gone if either one of our positions is filled by the other side. So people need to really think long and hard about this election and about how critical. And I know every politician that tells you this is the most critical race of your life. But for the people in the 17th LD, this is the most critical race. They haven't had this opportunity in decades. And so please reach out to me and Marla, check out our websites. Both of us are really committed to working to improve the lives of working families in this district.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't want to echo what Terry just said, but it could not be more true. These are open seats in a newly drawn district. This is a chance to make a mark on Southwest Washington and set a new tone for the future. We both believe in making government work. We want to be public servants for our communities. That is where our focus is representing the people, getting in there and fixing policies that are creating roadblocks right now on the ground, but also listening to the people, not special interests. You can't keep sending the same people to Olympia and expect different results. So in my seat, I'm running against someone that's been going to Olympia for 14 years. Evaluate us on the issues. And I think when you do that, you realize that before you right now are 2 candidates that are putting our families first, the issues that matter to them, housing, access to healthcare, economic development, and investment in Southwest Washington that is in a way that is true to the communities that have been built so far. At the end of the day, that's what this comes down to. Day in and day out, we are going to be working for you. We are going to be doing the things that are seen and felt on the ground in the 17th district.
So, if the listeners do want to reach out to you, how would they do that, Terry?
So you can find me at voteterrynows.com, or you can email me at niles17thld@gmail.com. Or, I give out my phone number at the doors to anybody that wants to call me. It's 541-221-1297, and I would love to talk to you. Just as Marla said, she's running against an incumbent that's been there for a while. I'm running against an incumbent that is not labor friendly, is a 22-year pharmaceutical marketing sales rep, and I don't think we need one of those in the legislature. So please consider voting for me. Reach out.
And Marla, how about you?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that because really at the end of the day, this is about the people making a hiring decision. So you should be able to ask us questions. You're trying to hire the right person for these jobs. So if you want to reach me, you can go to marlaforsenate.com. You can email me at info@marlaforsenate.com, and you can call me. I mean, if Terry's going to throw out her cell phone number, I feel like she threw down the gauntlet. So this is my cell. It's 509-255-3163. Text, phone calls, same thing. Our job is to be approachable, not just while we're running, but once we're working for you. So definitely welcome the chance to meet and answer questions.
Well, thank you so much, Terry Niles and Marla Keithler, running for state legislature in the 17th Legislative District. And thank you, working people, for joining us on another episode of Working to Live in Southwest Washington, produced by the Southwest Washington Central Labor Council. Folks, Terry is right. There are so many things that unify us as working people, no matter what job we have. We still need to make money to pay the bills. We still need to be treated fairly at work. We still need to have time to spend with our families. The Southwest Washington Central Labor Council believes that every working person deserves those things. That's why they support good union contracts in the workplace. And that's why this podcast was recorded under a SAG-AFTRA collective bargaining agreement. Remember, working people, this is your show. We want to know what you want to hear on it. Email us at podcast@swwaclc.org. Or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and, yeah, I'm still calling it Twitter, at SWWACLC. And hey, don't forget to subscribe to the show. And while you're at it, give us 5 stars or knock on the door of the voters or whatever your podcast platform of choice gives you to let people know you like what we're doing here. One last thing, folks. Thinking back to our conversation with Terry and Marla, something really stood out to me. It's this idea that if we want the people in power to be able to give us what we need to have people who understand our lives in the halls of power. Think about it. Terry is an intensive care nurse. Marla is the mayor of a small town. Who better to explain to the other people in the legislature about the needs of healthcare workers, about the needs of people living in smaller rural communities than the people who have actually been there? As you're opening up your ballot and you're looking at the people who are running for office, think about their life experience. Think about whether they can relate to what you're going through on a day-to-day basis. Because these are the people who are going to be making decisions that affect your life. And if they don't understand the kind of life you live, well, those decisions might not be the best for you. So read about their experience in the voters pamphlet on their website. Do some research on who these people are, because we want to send people who understand the lives of working families to every level of government, not just our state government in Olympia, not just our federal government in Washington, D.C., every single level. That's how we can make sure that we're taking care of all working families everywhere. We'll see you soon.